In 1894, a rifle rolled off a Connecticut assembly line that would hang above more American fireplaces than any painting ever made. It fed families through the Depression, went to war in a dozen barns, and taught 3 generations of boys how to hold their breath before the shot. Number 4 on this list cost less than a week's wages and still drops a buck at 200 yards. Number 9 was the first gun a grandfather ever trusted a 10-year-old to carry alone. And number 1, most of you already have it in a closet. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 15 forgotten hunting rifles American grandfathers passed down for generations. Number 15, the Stevens favorite. Before a boy ever touched a deer rifle, he touched one of these. The Stevens favorite was a single-shot .22 with a falling block action, first made in the 1890s and sold by the tens of thousands right up through the middle of the 20th century. It was light, it was small, and it was built for hands that had not finished growing yet. A grandfather would hand it over on a Saturday morning with a box of shorts and one rule: you get one shot, so make it count. That single-shot discipline is exactly why he chose it. No magazine meant no spraying, no carelessness, no second chances to lean on. You learned to breathe, to squeeze, to wait. A favorite cost about $6 new in 1910 and less used, which is why it ended up in barns and cabins across the whole country. The little rifle taught marksmanship the hard way, the honest way. Boys shot tin cans off fence posts, then squirrels for the pot, then finally graduated to something bigger. Nobody makes them like this anymore. The break-action .22s that replaced them were cheaper, but they never carried the same weight of a grandfather standing behind you, saying nothing, just watching to see if you would rush it. Number 14, the Remington Nylon 66. In 1959, Remington did something that horrified traditionalists. They built a rifle with a stock made of plastic, not wood. DuPont nylon, molded and reinforced in a color they called Mohawk brown. Purists laughed, then they shot it. The Nylon 66 was a .22 semi-automatic that fed from the buttstock, weighed barely 4 pounds, and simply would not quit. Remington famously fired one over 75,000 rounds in a test without cleaning it, and it kept running. That nylon stock did not warp in the rain, did not crack in the cold, and did not need a drop of oil. For a farm kid or a trapline grandfather, that was everything. This was the rifle that lived behind the truck seat, the one that came out for rabbits, for cans, for teaching cousins on a lazy Sunday. It cost about $40 in 1960, and Remington sold more than 1 million of them before they stopped in 1991. Grandfathers loved it because it was the gun you never had to baby. You could leave it in a damp shed all winter, and it would still cycle a whole tube of long rifles without a single hiccup. We traded these for fancier stocks and forgot that the ugly brown plastic gun outlasted almost everything prettier that came after it. Number 13, the Sporterized Krag-Jorgensen. Here's a rifle most people have never heard of, and yet thousands of American deer were taken with it. The Krag-Jorgensen was the U.S. Army's rifle from 1992 to 1903, chambered in .30-40 Krag, with a smooth side-loading magazine so slick that shooters still talk about it a century later. When the Army replaced it, surplus Krags flooded the civilian market for a few dollars apiece. Grandfathers and great-grandfathers who could not afford a purpose-built hunting rifle bought a beat-up Krag, cut down the long military stock, and turned a battlefield relic into a deer gun. That side-loading magazine let you top off rounds one at a time without opening the bolt, which is exactly what you want sitting still in the timber. The action cocked so smoothly you could cycle it slow and quiet with a deer 30 yards off and never spook it. A Sporterized Krag cost almost nothing to build in the 1920s and 1930s, which is why so many working families owned one. The .30-40 cartridge hit hard enough for anything in the eastern woods. These rifles passed down quietly, often with the grandfather's own file marks still on the reshaped stock, proof that the man who hunted with it had also built it with his hands. Number 12, the Winchester Model, 1895. Most lever guns of the old days used a tube magazine under the barrel, which meant flat or round-nosed bullets only. The Winchester Model 1895 broke that rule. It fed from a box magazine below the action, which let it fire pointed, high-velocity cartridges no other lever gun could handle. That made it the most powerful lever action of its era, chambered in serious rounds like 30-06 and the thumping 405 Winchester. This was Theodore Roosevelt's rifle. He carried a Model 1895 and 405 on his African safari and called it his big medicine for lion. For an American grandfather, owning a Model 1895 meant owning history you could actually hunt with. It was heavier and clunkier than the sleek 30-30 lever guns, but it hit like a freight train and reached farther. It cost around $25 in the early 1900s, real money at the time, so the men who bought them tended to be serious about elk, moose, and bear. When one of these came down through a family, it usually came with a story, because a rifle that could stop a charging animal tended to be present for the kind of hunt nobody ever forgot. Winchester stopped regular production long ago, and the box magazine lever gun quietly faded from the deer woods. Number 11, the Savage Model. 340. Not every family could afford a Winchester or a Remington, and Savage knew it. The Model 340 was the working man's bolt action, a plain, honest, no-frills rifle chambered in cartridges like 30-30, 22 Hornet, and two 22 Remington. It fed from a detachable box magazine at a time when most budget rifles made you load one round at a time. It was never pretty. The stock was often stained hardwood, the finish was thin, and the bolt handle looked like it was bent by hand. But it shot straight, and it cost about half what the big-name rifles did through the 1950s and 1960s, which is exactly why it ended up in so many blue-collar hands. A father working a mill shift could put a Model 340 under the Christmas tree and know it would kill deer for the next 40 years. And it did. These rifles got handed down not because they were valuable, but because they worked. And because Dad shot his first buck with one. And his son did too. The gun magazines never fawned over the 340. Collectors mostly ignore it today. But if you talk to men whose families never had much money, the Savage 340 shows up again and again as the first centerfire rifle they ever owned. First pattern break. Here is where this stops being about guns and starts being about something else. A rifle passed down in an American family was never really about the steel and the wood. It was about the handoff itself. Think about what that moment actually was. A grandfather, hands gone stiff and spotted, taking a rifle down off the pegs where it had lived for 50 years and putting it into the hands of a kid who could barely hold it level. That rifle had already killed the deer that fed the family through a hard winter. It had been carried through timber the boy had never seen, by a man the boy only half remembered. And now it was his. These rifles were memory made solid. Every scratch on the stock came from a specific day. That worn spot on the bolt was where a thumb wrote it 10,000 times. The men who passed them down were not passing down a tool. They were saying, without ever finding the words, that they trusted you to carry something they had carried and to do it right. Number 10, the Remington Model 41 Gamemaster. Long before the deer woods filled up with bolt guns and scopes, a huge number of American hunters swore by the pump. The Remington Model 141 Gamemaster, made from 1936 into the 1950s, was a slide-action rifle chambered most famously in 35 Remington, a fat, hard-hitting cartridge built for close work and thick brush. A man who grew up shooting a pump shotgun could pick up a 141 and run it without thinking, because the motion was identical. Rack the forend, fire, rack again, all without ever taking the rifle off his shoulder or his eye off the deer. In the tangled second-growth forests of the Northeast and the Midwest, where shots came fast and close, that speed mattered more than long-range precision. The 35 Remington round dumped enough energy to flatten a big woods buck at the ranges most men actually shot. A Gamemaster cost around $40 before the war, and it earned its keep. These rifles hung in farmhouses across deer country and came down through families who never hunted any other way. The pump-action deer rifle has almost vanished now, pushed aside by bolt actions and semi-autos, but for 2 generations of American hunters, the sound of a forend sliding home was the sound of the season starting. Number 9, the Winchester Model 88. Winchester built a lever gun for the modern age, and then the age passed it by. The Model 88, introduced in 1955, looked like a traditional lever action, but hid a secret. It fed from a detachable box magazine and used a rotating bolt action, which let it fire pointed, powerful modern cartridges like the 308 Winchester and the 243. It was fast like a lever gun and accurate like a bolt gun, and it wore a smooth one-piece stock that felt like nothing else on the rack. For a grandfather who wanted lever-action speed without giving up the flat shooting range of a scoped bolt rifle, the Model 88 was the answer. It let a man take a running shot in the timber and a long poke across a bean field with the same rifle. It cost around $130 in the late 1950s, more than most, which is why the men who bought them tended to keep them for life. Winchester stopped making the 88 in the early 1970s, and it never got the love it deserved. But the ones that survived became prized family rifles, the gun a granddad would only let you shoot if you had proven you would respect it. Number 8, the Marlin Model 39A. This is the 22 that grandfathers actually chose to keep. The Marlin Model 39A is a lever-action rimfire whose design lineage runs all the way back to 1891, making it one of the longest continuously produced firearms in American history. It was everything a boy's first serious rifle should be. The lever action taught good habits, the takedown design let you break it in half for cleaning and carrying, and the thing was simply built better than any cheap plinker. A grandfather who wanted to teach a grandchild to shoot did not reach for a plastic gun. He reached for the 39A because it would still be shooting long after the kid had children of his own. It fed shorts, longs, and long rifles all from the same tube, and it was accurate enough to clip a squirrel's head at 40 yards, which was the standard the old men held you to. It cost about $50 in the 1950s, real money for a 22, and worth every penny. These rifles racked up more first squirrels, first rabbits, and first tin cans than almost any gun in America. When a 39A came down through a family, it came polished by decades of small hands, warm and worn where the lever met the wood. Number 7, the Winchester Model 1873. They called it the gun that won the West, and by the time it reached your grandfather's generation, it had already earned every inch of that name. The Winchester Model 1873 was the rifle that put a repeating lever action in the hands of ordinary Americans, chambered in cartridges like the 4440, a round you could also fire in your revolver, so you only had to carry one kind of ammunition. That single feature made it the working gun of the frontier, and later, the treasured heirloom of families whose grandfathers had homesteaded. By the 20th century, an old Model 1873 was not the deer rifle a man carried every fall. It was the rifle that hung over the mantle, the one that had been in the family since before anyone living could remember, the one a grandfather would take down and let you hold on Thanksgiving while he told you which ancestor had carried it and what for. Original 1873s in good condition became genuinely valuable, but their real worth was never the price tag. It was the unbroken thread they represented, one set of hands to the next, all the way back to a homestead and a hard country and people you only knew from a rifle they left behind. Number 6, the Remington Model 760 Gamemaster. The pump-action deer rifle reached its peak with this one. The Remington Model 760, introduced in 1952, took everything hunters loved about the old slide guns and modernized it, chambering serious cartridges like the 3006 and 270 while keeping that lightning-fast pump action. In the deer camps of Pennsylvania, where more hunters take the woods on opening day than almost anywhere in America, the 760 became something close to a religion. A man could fire, pump, and be back on target faster than a bolt gun shooter could work his action. And in the thick Pennsylvania timber where a buck might show for 2 seconds, that speed filled a lot of tags. It was accurate, it was tough, and it handled full power rounds that reached out as far as anyone needed. A Gamemaster cost around $100 in the 1950s, and fathers bought them knowing the rifle would outlast them. It did. The 760 and its successor, the 7600, came down through countless families as the definitive deer camp rifle, the gun that meant frost on the truck window and coffee in the dark, and a grandfather nudging you awake before dawn. The pump deer rifle has faded now, but in its country, it was king. Second pattern break. Here's something the modern gun industry does not want you to sit with too long. Almost none of these rifles were expensive when they mattered. A working man in 1955 could walk into a hardware store or flip open a Sears catalog at the kitchen table and buy a rifle that would kill deer for the next 60 years for less than a week's pay. There was no tactical marketing, no endless accessories, no reason to own 14 of them. You owned one good rifle, you learned it cold, and you passed it on. The whole point was permanence. A rifle was a lifetime purchase, sometimes a multi-lifetime purchase, and that changed how men treated it. They cleaned it. They knew exactly where it shot. They could tell you the story of every deer it had taken. Today, the industry sells novelty. A new model every year, a reason to trade up and trade up again. But your grandfather did not trade up. He bought the best rifle he could afford one time, and he made it last, and then he gave it to you. That is the thing we actually lost, not the guns. The idea that one good thing, cared for, could be enough. Number 5, the Savage Model 99. Ask an old hunter which lever gun was truly ahead of its time, and a lot of them will say the Savage Model 99. Introduced in 1899, it was a hammerless lever action with a brilliant rotary magazine, a spool inside the action that let it safely fire pointed, high-velocity cartridges decades before other lever guns could. Some models even had a little counter window that showed how many rounds you had left, a genius touch no other rifle offered. It was chambered in flat shooting rounds, like the legendary 300 Savage, which nearly matched the 30-06 in a lighter, faster package. For a grandfather who wanted the quick handling of a lever gun with the reach of a modern cartridge, the 99 had no equal. It balanced like a dream, pointed like a fine shotgun, and simply looked elegant in a way few working rifles did. It cost more than a plain 30-30, which is why the men who owned one tended to be a little more particular about their hunting. Savage finally ended production of the 99 after nearly a century, and there has never been anything quite like it since. The ones passed down are cherished, because everyone who inherits a 99 quickly realizes their grandfather had better taste than they gave him credit for. Number 4, the Winchester Model 70. They called it the rifleman's rifle, and no bolt action ever wore a nickname more honestly. The Winchester Model 70, introduced in 1936, set the standard that every serious hunting rifle after it was measured against. It had a controlled round feed action so smooth and so reliable that hunters trusted it on dangerous game where a jam meant death. It was accurate, it was strong, and it was beautiful, with a stock and lines that made men want to just hold it. The pre-1964 Model 70s in particular became legendary, so prized that the phrase pre-64 is still shorthand among collectors for a certain lost standard of American craftsmanship. It was chambered in everything from the .270 Winchester, a round that practically became famous because of this rifle, up through the biggest magnums. A Model 70 cost more than most working families wanted to spend, which is exactly why owning one meant something. When a father saved up and bought a Model 70, he was buying a rifle he intended to be buried near, and to hand down first. These rifles came through families as the crown jewel, the one you did not shoot casually, the one that got cleaned every single time and returned to its case like something holy. For millions of American hunters, the Model 70 was simply the finest rifle they would ever own. Number 3, the Remington Model 700. If the Model 70 was the rifle of your grandfather's youth, the Remington Model 700 was the rifle of his prime. Introduced in 1962, the 700 used a cylindrical receiver and a strong, simple action that turned out to be so accurate, straight from the box, that the US military built sniper rifles on it and still does. For the ordinary deer hunter, that meant something incredible. A working man could buy an off-the-shelf rifle for a reasonable price and expect precision that used to require a custom gunsmith. Chambered in everything from the .243 up through the .30-06 and the big magnums, the 700 could be whatever a hunter needed it to be. It cost around $130 in the mid-1960s, and it quickly became one of the best-selling bolt-action rifles in American history, which is exactly why it fills so many family gun cabinets today. This was the rifle a father bought when he wanted his son to start with something that would never hold him back. Something accurate enough that any miss was the shooter's fault and not the gun's. The Model 700 came down through families as the reliable one, the rifle that just worked, the gun that taught a whole generation what a scope and a steady rest could really do. Third pattern break. Here is the part nobody says out loud. We did not forget these rifles because they stopped working. Every gun on this list will still kill a deer clean tomorrow morning. We forgot them because forgetting was easier than remembering what they cost us. A rifle passed down carries the man who carried it, and that is a heavy thing to keep in a closet. It means every time you take it out, you have to think about him, about the deer camps that do not happen anymore, about the phone calls you should have made, about the fact that the hands that handed it to you are gone. So the rifle goes to the back of the safe, wrapped in an old sock, and stays there. But that rifle is the closest thing most families have to a time machine. Pick it up, work the action, smell the oil, and for 1 second you are 10 years old again in the dark, and he is beside you. And everything he never knew how to say is right there in the weight of the thing. These rifles were never about hunting. They were about being remembered. Number 2, the Marlin Model 336. For sheer numbers of American deer taken by working families, few rifles come close to the Marlin Model 336. Introduced in 1948 as the refinement of an older design, the 336 was a lever-action chambered most famously in .30-30 Winchester and the harder-hitting .35 Remington, built to be the affordable deer rifle for everyone. And it was. Where the Winchester lever guns carried a certain prestige and price, the Marlin Model 336 was the honest, no-nonsense choice, side ejecting so you could mount a scope right over the top, solid where it counted, and cheap enough that nearly any family could own one. It cost well under $100 for most of its life, and Marlin sold them by the millions. This was the rifle leaning in the corner of 1,000 farmhouse kitchens, the one that came out every November, the one Dad shot his buck with, and then Grandpa's old .30-30 got retired, and this one took over. The 336 defined deer season for blue-collar America the way few objects ever have. When it comes down through a family, it usually comes worn and honest, blued thin at the muzzle, the wood dark from decades of bare hands, a working rifle that never pretended to be anything else and never had to. Number 1, the Winchester Model 94. There was only ever going to be one rifle at the top of this list. The Winchester Model 1894, designed by John Browning and chambered in the .30-30 cartridge, is the most passed down hunting rifle in American history, and it is not particularly close. For more than a century, it was simply America's deer rifle. Slim, light, and perfectly balanced, it carried like a walking stick and pointed like an extension of your own arm. It hung in the rear window of more pickup trucks than any gun ever made. It fed families through the Depression when a single box of .30-30 shells had to last a whole season, and every shot was aimed to bring home meat. Winchester built over 7 million of them, which means the odds are good that somewhere in your own family, in a closet or a safe or over a fireplace, there is a Model 94 with somebody's initials scratched into the stock. It cost less than $20 for much of its early life, an affordable rifle for the common man by design, and that is precisely why it ended up everywhere. This is the rifle a grandfather taught a father taught a son to shoot. The same steel, the same lever, the same held breath before the same kind of shot. When the Model 94 comes down through a family, it does not come as a collector's item. It comes as the rifle, the one that has always been there, the one that will still be dropping deer and telling stories long after all of us are the grandfathers in the story. Here's my challenge. Go find the rifle your family passed down. It is in a closet, a safe, behind a coat somewhere. Take it out, work the action, and figure out what it is off this list. Then find out who carried it before you and what they carried it for before that story is gone for good. Drop the rifle you inherited in the comments. I want to know if the Model 94s outnumber the Marlins, and I want to know whose grandfather is still remembered every fall because of a rifle he left behind. Because these were never just guns. They were the last thing a lot of good men ever got to hand us.